Asylums have always been surrounded by mystery, fear, and tragedy. What many people don't know is that some of the most horrifying stories aren't just fictional. They're real. The stories of abuse, neglect, and unspeakable acts within these walls still echo through time, chilling anyone who dares to listen. Today, we're diving into 3 terrifying asylum stories from history that continue to haunt us. So get ready, because these tales are not for the faint-hearted. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more spine-tingling tales. 3. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, West Virginia. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia, opened its doors in 1864 with a mission to provide a sanctuary for individuals suffering from mental illness. Designed to accommodate just 250 patients, the asylum's grand architecture, with its imposing Gothic walls and towering structures, promised to offer a refuge from the outside world. However, what was intended to be a compassionate institution quickly descended into chaos and horror as overcrowding, neglect, and abuse overtook the facility. By the mid-1950s, the asylum's population swelled to over 2,400 individuals, far surpassing its intended capacity. The building, originally a beacon of hope, became a place of suffering. With the rapid influx of patients, resources and staff became severely overstretched. The hospital, once a center for care, had devolved into a nightmare of torment. Treatments, which were often primitive and cruel, included electroshock therapy, isolation, and restraint, which became standard methods used on those who were deemed difficult or unmanageable. Patients, many of whom were simply abandoned by their families or labeled as unfit for society, were subjected to inhumane conditions. Solitary confinement became common practice, leaving individuals alone in small dark cells, often for years at a time. The asylum's psychiatric treatments, which often involved mind-numbing drugs or physical restraint, stripped patients of their dignity and humanity. Many patients were left to die in these bleak circumstances, forgotten and neglected by both the medical staff and the outside world. As the asylum continued its downward spiral, its halls grew increasingly empty of any sense of hope. The long corridors became filled with echoes of suffering, with whispers of ghostly apparitions and strange sounds. Staff, overwhelmed and unable to manage the number of patients, resorted to whatever extreme measures they could think of to maintain order. But the asylum's true horror lies not only in the treatments but in the lives that were wasted there. For many, Trans-Allegheny became their final resting place, a place where they were locked away and left to fade into obscurity. After years of deterioration, the asylum was finally closed in 1994. Yet the shadows of its dark past continue to linger. Today, the building stands as a grim reminder of the horrors of mental health treatment in the past. Visitors, some seeking a glimpse into history, others hoping for a brush with the supernatural, report seeing shadowy figures in the hallways and hearing cries and whispers from the long-forgotten patients. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is now a haunting monument to the broken souls who suffered within its walls, a place where the echoes of their torment still seem to reverberate through the empty halls. 2. The Lobotomies at Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital, New Jersey. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital, located in Morris Plains, New Jersey, opened in 1876 and became notorious for its controversial and cruel treatments throughout the 20th century. One of the most horrifying practices carried out at Greystone was the lobotomy, particularly during the 1940s and 1950s. The lobotomy, a procedure that involved severing the connections in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, was performed on thousands of patients. The goal was to treat mental illnesses, but the result often left individuals with permanent, severe cognitive and emotional impairments. Some patients were left in comas, others in vegetative states, and many were left with a diminished capacity for normal life. What made these lobotomies even more disturbing was the way they were conducted. Many surgeries were done without anesthesia, with crude tools like ice picks used to physically sever brain connections. This procedure was often performed without patient consent, and in many cases, patients were subjected to multiple lobotomies, leaving them in irreversible states of mind and body. The staff at Greystone were undertrained and overwhelmed by the overcrowding in the facility, leading to substandard care and neglect. In addition to the lobotomies, Greystone became infamous for its horrific living conditions. The hospital was overcrowded, underfunded, and poorly maintained. Patients were often left in filthy, unsanitary rooms and subjected to isolation and neglect. The staff's lack of adequate training and the hospital's failure to provide proper care led to a constant atmosphere of suffering. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital eventually closed its doors in 2008, but the ghosts of its dark past remain. Paranormal investigators visiting the abandoned site have reported unexplained noises, eerie voices, and sightings of apparitions, believed to be the spirits of former patients. The horrors of the lobotomies, neglect, and abuse at Greystone have left a lasting scar on the institution's legacy, one that continues to haunt the grounds to this day. 1. The Willowbrook State School, New York. The Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York, is infamous for its disturbing legacy of abuse and neglect. Originally opened in 1947 as a care facility for children with intellectual disabilities, Willowbrook quickly became a site of unimaginable suffering. While it was designed to house just a few hundred children, at its peak, the facility was overcrowded with over 6,000 residents, far exceeding its capacity and creating the conditions for widespread mistreatment. The institution's tragic downfall was not widely known until the 1970s, when investigative journalist Geraldo Rivera exposed the horrors within its walls. Inside Willowbrook, the children were subjected to cruel and inhumane conditions. Rooms were filthy, overcrowded, and unsanitary, with children often left to languish in their own waste. Many were restrained, either tied to their beds or left in isolation, deprived of care and comfort. The staff, woefully undertrained and overwhelmed by the sheer number of residents, were unable or unwilling to provide the children with proper care. Physical abuse was rampant, and medical neglect left many children suffering from untreated diseases. Perhaps the most horrific aspect of Willowbrook was the unethical experiments carried out on the children. In the 1950s and 1960s, children were deliberately injected with diseases like hepatitis to study the effects of these infections without their consent or that of their families. These experiments, which violated the most basic ethical standards, further demonstrated the utter disregard for the well-being of the children in the institution. Rivera's expose in the 1970s brought the situation at Willowbrook to national attention. The images of emaciated children, many of whom were gravely ill, shocked the public and led to a wave of outrage. His documentary revealed the abysmal conditions and the systemic abuse, which prompted investigations and public outcry. As a result, Willowbrook was gradually shut down, with the facility finally closing its doors in 1987. The scandal not only led to the closure of the institution, but also sparked reforms in the care of individuals with disabilities. Despite the closure, the legacy of Willowbrook endures. The abandoned site remains a haunting symbol of the abuse that took place within its walls. Visitors to the grounds often report hearing the faint echoes of children's laughter or whispers on the wind, as though the spirits of those forgotten souls are still trapped in the place they were once confined. The ghostly presence of Willowbrook serves as a chilling reminder of the atrocities committed in the name of care and the suffering endured by its residents. These real asylum horror stories show the disturbing history of how vulnerable individuals were treated in the past and how the consequences of these practices still linger today. The suffering, abuse, and neglect that occurred behind those closed doors are a stark reminder of the horrors that can take place when society fails to care for its most vulnerable. If you found these stories chilling, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying true stories from history. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the darkest stories are the ones that are true.